Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and thank you for listening to the YFP podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. This week I welcome back Derek Schwartz, a guest from episode 14 way back in 2017, to share his journey from PharmD to debt-free to pursuing financial independence, retire early. We discuss why he and his family are on the FIRE path, how his financial decisions post-graduation help put him on a path towards building wealth, the biggest challenges that they're facing in pursuit of FIRE, and how he's striking the balance between living a rich life today and saving for the future. Now, before we jump into the show, I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered how to evaluate the benefits package and offer you receive once you've landed a job? If so, our upcoming webinar supported by APHA is for you. On Wednesday, April 17th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, my partner in crime, YFP co-founder and director of financial planning, Tim Baker, is hosting a free webinar titled Money Moves, How to Evaluate Benefits Packages and Job Offers. During this webinar, Tim will dig into the valuable connection between career and finance and the ins and outs of benefit packages and offers. He'll teach you how to navigate components of employer benefits, including insurance, FSA, HSAs, employer-sponsored retirement accounts, as well as help you understand components of a job offer and how to evaluate one. Plus, Tim's going to do a live walkthrough and evaluation of real pharmacist job offers from you, the YFP community. So send us your pharmacist job offer, current or past, to info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com with the subject line job offer. Don't worry, we'll keep these anonymous. And if you attend live, you'll have the chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card or a YFP bundle, which includes a YFP t-shirt and our 4 books published at YFP. To save your seat and to register, visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/offer. Again, that's yourfinancialpharmacist.com/offer. All right, let's jump into my interview with Derek Schwartz. Derek, welcome back to the show.
Great to see you again.
So excited to have you back. This has been a while in the making for our community to know. We had Derek on way back when, nearly 7 years ago at this point, episode 14, September 2017. We talked about your journey, graduated from Ohio Northern University in 2014. Go Polar Bears.
Go Polar Bears.
And paying off $180,000 of debt in just about 4 years. And that was 2018 when you guys finished that debt repayment journey. We'll link to that episode in the show notes so folks can go back. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but really focus on your journey now and where you're at present day and how you and your family are on this path towards financial independence. So Derek, since it's been such a while, 2017, what's changed since we last spoke?
Oh man, what hasn't changed? So when we recorded the podcast, and I begrudgingly listened to it, so I think I join everyone that they don't like to hear themselves talk. Absolutely. So I struggled through that. I had not paid off my debt when I recorded that. So my debt repayment that I finished was March 30th of 2018. So just in a couple of days, it's been 6 years. Which is just crazy because it's been so long and that was such a big part of my life, and it's so far in the distant past I hardly think about it anymore. And that was always the goal for paying off that debt because it sets up everything else so nicely. So it's a typical story. You meet someone, you get engaged, and my wife and I got engaged in January of 2020, and I was like, this is gonna be a great year. Nothing bad is going to happen in 2020. It's going to be smooth sailing from here. As everyone knows, wasn't the case. But it was an opportunity for us to buy our future home. We moved into a good part of town where we wanted to raise kids, and then we started a family. So we have 2 kids. I have a 2-year-old daughter and an almost 8-month-old son. So things have been great so far.
That's a lot in a short period of time, as we often see with new practitioners coming out. You've been out now a decade coming up here, right, this spring. But, you graduate, start your first job, get married, you've got a couple kids, paid off your loans. I mean, just a lot that happens. And one of the things I was sharing with you before we hit record, which I think is a great example here, Derek, in the work that you and your family have done is, the decisions we make and that first 5 to 7 years is the window I often talk about. This transition, right, from student to new practitioner really is so critical to setting the foundation upon which we can build. And we're going to talk about how now you guys are on this path towards financial independence, which I presume is probably not possible or possible to the degree that it is if you didn't work hard to put some of those rocks in place, some of the foundational pieces in place early on in your journey. And so, you know, again, we'll link back to that episode so people can hear the details of that debt-free journey, but just remind us of the motivation, the why behind a pretty aggressive debt repayment, $180,000, about 4 years. Everyone's on their own journey. Everyone feels different about their debt. But for you guys, obviously, it was a decision to be intentional about paying it off in a short period of time, which again has led to the place that you're in today. Why was that such an important piece of the plan for you guys to get out of that debt as quickly as possible?
I think it was because there was no other option.
Hmm.
When you have that much debt, it stops you from saving, it stops you from investing, it stops you from using your income to um, benefit future savings, having fun, just doing anything. It's having that much debt and trying to do other things is like trying to run a marathon without stretching.
Hmm.
You're not going to get far. You're going to get hurt. You're going to have to restart and then you get to go back to square one. So the goal of getting out of debt was just to get past that so that options were actually on the table that were
Hmm.
available. And once you are completely out of debt, it's like shutting a book and just tossing out the window. It's done. You don't have to
Hmm.
go back.
Yeah, and I think, I often share, Derek, that when I think back to my journey, Jess and I paying off a couple $100,000 of debt and making every mistake you could make along the way. It was really when most of that journey was before we had kids, and the end of that journey, our kids were very young. But I now think about that monthly payment, right, that we were making, which was pretty aggressive at the time. And basically, as I now see the expenses with kids rising, right, which is natural. I've got some older boys that are starting to eat us out of the house, but for other people, it's daycare, right? It's other costs, it's saving for kids' college. But the point being that that payment that I think of that we were making towards our student loans, you can pretty much just put that money over to expenses, right, that are associated now with having young children that weren't there before. And for us, I know personally it would be a burden currently if we were still trying to work through those payments while other expenses were rising. Does that resonate as you guys are, obviously growing a young family, having that margin through having that debt paid off has allowed you to really have some more flexibility as naturally expenses will rise as you have young children?
Yeah, for sure. And we started with our daughter in daycare, and we quickly learned that wasn't for us. We were getting a lot of sick calls. We had to go in, bring her home. My wife and I both work full time, and we were soon to be one of us is going to have to work part time to
Hmm.
have to get around daycare. So we've hired a nanny, which was the best decision that we made. And, we couldn't afford that with student loan payments. We couldn't
Hmm.
afford that with a credit card payment or a car loan or anything that, requires a monthly payment like that. So it's the setup to getting flexible with the budget has to start with being in a position where you can be flexible.
Hmm.
And without any like debt that's just holding you down, that flexibility is just gone. So it limits your options.
Hmm.
And we don't want to have to, you know, talk about every single transaction that we do where we buy something. Like, hey, can we afford to have a date night? We don't have to have that discussion
Yeah.
because we don't have, all these loans and like this massive budget that we have to worry about. We still budget, but that's in the budget. So you don't have to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. What I hear there, Derek, is breathing room, right? You've used the word options, flexibility a couple times already. But when you have breathing room, we underestimate the mental space and clarity that can come from that. And, I think you can probably appreciate this working on this topic together with your spouse. Like a lack of breathing room, a lack of margin is a recipe for stress and arguments and, not being on the same page financially, right? So creating that breathing room, which we know is easier said than done. We look at today's graduate; they're coming out with 150, $200,000 of debt. You and I we're fortunate to not necessarily be buying a home at where home prices are in 2024 and interest rates. There are headwinds, right, that today's graduates are facing that are real. And unfortunately, those eat into that breathing room. They eat into that margin. But we know when we can create that breathing room and space, we have options, we have flexibility. We're able to really progress and move forward with the financial plan and play offense instead of constantly being on our heels playing defense. I do want to poke for a moment on the budget because I think that's something that When I talk about budgeting, to a group of pharmacists, everyone again is on their own journey, but I often see the look of like, ugh, like, do I have to, right? Do I have to track? Do I have to do these things? And I try to reframe the budget as being the mechanism by which we're achieving our financial goals. Now, how detailed you want to get is up to you, whatever works for you. And everyone, again, is going to be different. But if we reframe it that the budget, the spending plan, the system, whatever you want to call it, is simply the execution plan for achieving our goals, I think we can get behind that a little bit more. And you made a comment that, hey, we're budgeting, but we're maybe not tracking things at the granular level of, hey, can we go on a date night tonight or not? And is the budget $20 or $30 or whatever that number is? So tell us about what your budgeting system looks like right now and maybe how that's evolved over time.
Yeah, the budget before when I had debt was so rigid because I knew exactly how much I was making. I knew exactly how much was going to, at the time I was living in an apartment, so rent, utilities, and it was a very locked in number. And that's what it was going to be every month. And that was the number that would knock down that debt. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the motivation for such a rigid budget is I knew exactly when those loans would be paid off. And now it's completely changed because when you're talking about no debt, what are you saving for? What's
Mm-hmm.
your goal? You can be so much more flexible when there's not some restraint of I'm budgeting to get over this instead of I'm budgeting to get to this.
Yep.
And when you're budgeting to just have that independence that you want in your life financially, you can be so flexible with it.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I, before we had kids, we were saving a ton of money. I want to say at least 40 to 50% of our income, we were
Wow.
saving that because we were in a position where we're like, hey, we want to have kids. We know the timeline that we want to be on. We wanted to have a couple kids. We wanted a family. We knew it was going to be in a couple years. So we're like, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
Let's just save for the next couple years and then put ourselves in that position. So we just saved super aggressively. And then when the kids came and expenses come up, um, and you dial that budget
Mm-hmm.
back, it doesn't hurt as much because you're still saving. And when you're so aggressive to start, it's so much easier for it to be malleable, to just mold it what
Yeah.
you need it to be. And then we then look forward to having goals of, hey, we can get that back to where we want it once kids are in school and once we have less expenses because they're both we had two under two for quite a long time, and not only was it financially stressful, but just in general stressful.
Yep.
And we see where it can get back to, and that's the motivation now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Derek, one of the things you shared that resonates with me is because of your early aggressive savings. We'll talk about more of that here in a little bit with your fire journey. That gives you some permission to say, hey, this is a season we're in. This is a season of expenses. It may not be forever. It's going to look different in a few years. You mentioned that already. But let's say the opposite was true. Let's say you guys didn't save it all in the first 5, 7, now 10 years, a decade coming up on graduation. That's another layer of stress, right? Because, hey, we've now got rising expenses and we feel like we need to play catch up. And because you saved early in the journey, there probably isn't that nagging feeling of, hey, we've got to catch up, right? So again, breathing room and margin. So our theme for today is PharmD to debt free to fire. So again, graduated in 2014, debt free journey, paid off those student loans in 2018. Now you're really on this path and evolution towards building wealth and towards financial independence. We've talked about fire on the podcast many times. We've got a lot of resources on their website. If that term is new to those listening, financial independence, retire early. So we're going to spend a bulk of our interview talking through that with Derek. What does that mean to him? Where is he at in the journey? Why are they on the fire journey? And what has that looked like practically for them and their family? So, Derek, let me start there. It seems that the term fire, while there's formulas, calculations, all these things about how we can determine what our FI number is, I recognize that can mean something different to everyone. So, what does fire mean to you and to your family?
For us, it just means that we retire on our own terms. We both had the goal of retiring when we were 50. That's the goal. And because I love my wife, I will not say how old she is on a podcast. I am 34. That means I want to retire in 16 years. By the time I'm 50, we are done working and we want to pursue other interests. Um, the nice thing about being on this fire journey and being aggressive with saving when we did is with two kids, we looked at each other like, hey, this might be 55 now. That's still really early. Hey, we might push it back to like, 57, 58, maybe 60. We work part-time. That's still early.
Still early.
Um,
Yeah.
the financial independence side of the fire to us just means, hey, we're on our own terms. If we want to pursue other interests, we can do that. If we want to, scale back how much we're working, we can do that.
Hmm.
If we want to explore other interests that can make us money, we can do that and just leave our professions that we have behind. But once we get to that point, we'll know that we're covered financially. And then, the sky's the limit from there, where we can, instead of diversifying your money and where it's going, diversify your interests and see what,
Yeah.
what calls for you.
Yeah, what I really hear there, Derek, is options and opportunities that you could pursue, and it might be one of many different pathways. Maybe you decide to work part time, maybe you don't. Maybe you decide to travel a bunch. Maybe there's grandkids at that point in the future, and you want to have the flexibility of time. Like, maybe it's something that you're not even thinking about at this point, whether it's volunteering, but there's a ton of different things it could be. But having the option too, right? That is what really resonates with me when people talk about financial independence, regardless of what the number is or what the age is, maybe it's retire early, maybe it's not, but there's options to pursue A, B, C, D, E. I talked with somebody recently on the fire journey, a guest we've had on the podcast before, Corey Jenks, and he gave an example of, I think he referenced like walking into a sporting goods store or another type of business. And he was like, oh, that's interesting. Like maybe someday I just would want to try to work at one of these and kind of see what it's like. And when you're on an FI pathway, like those are the kinds of things that you can quote, take a risk on or roll the dice and say, oh, this would be interesting to do for, 6 or 12 months, whatever that might be. So I love what you're sharing there. One of the barriers I often see, Derek, is two individuals getting on the same page, not just in general with their finance, but here as we're talking about with fire. And often you might have one person who's gung ho, let's go, and maybe they even started the fire journey before they met their significant other, spouse, or partner. So my question for you is: Have you guys always been on the same page? Has this been an evolution? It sounds like you're very much in the shared vision of 50 or 55, 57, whatever that age is. Tell us more about how you've been able to work together and get on the same page.
Yeah, I am so blessed to have my wife, because on our first date we talked about just being financially independent. That was just such a goal for both of us.
Mm,
Probably weirded out a lot of people we were sitting by at the restaurant we were at, but that was just a goal for both of us. She was debt free when I met her. She owned her own home. She wanted to get into real estate.
mm,
She was already on that path. I had, my path was so much different from hers because I had all this debt I had to pay off that she still had some, but she had paid it off years before I met her. So we were on the same journey of getting to financially independence, but we started at completely different areas, and we just happened to meet at the time where, I was ready to start saving at the level that we wanted to. So at the time we met, I was talking about, buying my first home. Eventually as we dated, I kind of weaseled my way into her house and decided to just live there and pay her rent. And then we got married from there.
mhm,
But it's just always been a passion for both of us because we have so many more interests that aren't tied to our jobs. We both
mhm,
love our jobs. We love our work. But we love other things too. And part of that is with our kids, we want them to be also financially independent.
mhm,
And you can't preach that when you're not doing it.
mhm.
And that's a hard place to be in, of, teaching discipline with your kids and teaching, financial independence and, being your own person, and not, you just, having so much debt that you can't, do the goals that you want to do.
Yeah, and I appreciate the perspective you have on that, Derek. And I know you've got young ones. You mentioned the ages a little while ago. One of the things I'm appreciating with my boys, my oldest now going to be 13 this summer, is they are observing and picking up on things way younger, than you would think. Sure, they may not be able to articulate it, but there is definitely a culture in the house around money. They become very aware of how individuals are talking about money. Is it, fearful? Is it stressful? Is it an open conversation? Is it a closed conversation? And we're going to be talking more about that on the podcast here in the future about kids and money. It's a really, really important topic. But, I think just a note of encouragement to parents out there, like, hey, we're not going to get it right all the time. I haven't gotten it right. Jess and I haven't gotten it right all the time. But, really being cognizant and aware of the dialogue, the culture, the tenor, the tone of what's happening financially in the household, I think is so important. Derek, you mentioned 50, and I heard that evolve 53, 55, 57. When I hear that age, often an objection that will come up is, well, how are we actually going to be able to fund that, right? We're not yet at Social Security age. Maybe we've got dollars that are tied up predominantly in traditional retirement accounts, 401k, 403bs, IRAs, can't access those to 59 and a half without penalty. So there then becomes this question of, well, how do we actually produce a paycheck when we're at an early retirement age? And of course, all the fears that may come of, hey, are we going to run out of money too early? And where are we going to get health insurance benefits? Talk to us about how you guys are thinking about that while still a ways away. I'm sure it's something that's been on your mind.
Yeah, that's something that one of the first things we talked about is, hey, if we retire at 50, what do we do? So we have different accounts that, you can't touch certain retirement accounts until a certain age. We also have taxable accounts so we can't dip into. We have money that's set aside just in savings that we can get to at any time. By that time, we have a 15-year mortgage, so our house will be paid for. So it's kind of just like leveling with what do we have to anticipate paying for? What accounts can we get into? What can't we get into? What does that mean for, hey, if we retire at 50, are we actually retired? Can we do all the things we want? Or do we have to kind of like play it slow a little bit until we can get into some more taxable accounts that we're holding on to? And, it's flexible. And we'd rather have that conversation to 50 than 70 or 75. So it's kind of a non-answer. It's almost a, we'll see when we get to it. And that's why it's so nice just for it to be so flexible, because we don't know, what that looks like at 50. And then, if like we have to say, hey, we're going to work till 55 now, that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And that might not even be full time at that point. That might just be, hey, we're both working part time. Both our kids are, 18, maybe out of the house in college, maybe doing their own thing, and we can downsize our house. There's a lot of options that you can have. So another thing that we look at is, instead of saying, hey, at 50, what do we do? We'd rather do that than say, hey, we got to 65. Social Security's not there. Hey, we're not getting the health insurance we thought we'd get. Because you don't know what things are going to be. And with all those variables that are, so many are out of your control that you don't know. So we're planning for those to just not be there. And so that's kind of a different way to look at it, because most people assume that Social Security will be there. They'll have some kind of health insurance. We're looking at it as, hey, if we retire at 50 on our own, can we do it? Yeah. And we think we're on track to do that. But if we have to push it, we can push it.
Yeah, and what I hear there, Derek, is being comfortable with the uncomfortable and the unknowns, but not necessarily just kind of put your hands up and saying, hey, there's not planning that can be done, right? You mentioned several variables, assumptions, and any one of those can change. Some of them will change. Some of them may be better than you thought, worse than you thought. So there's planning that needs to be done. And we so often talk about the accumulation phase, right? But we don't often talk about the decumulation phase, whether that's early retirement or not. You're going to have several of these buckets of assets, right? You mentioned brokerage accounts, you mentioned traditional accounts. You've obviously got your home that will be an asset. Perhaps there's real estate now or in the future. I mean, you're going to have all these different buckets. Maybe there's Social Security involved. And it's a matter and function of, okay, well, for 55, where are we drawing from those? And how do we do that in a tax efficient way? And how do we make sure that we're optimizing which buckets we're drawing from? And essentially what we have to do is, our working career, we work and we get a paycheck, right? Well, when we're not working or working part-time and we need to fill up the rest of that income bucket, we have to produce our own paycheck in retirement, whether that's early or not. And I think there's so many nuances and planning opportunities there that we just don't talk enough about. How do we actually produce that retirement paycheck? You mentioned 15-year mortgage. I want to talk about that for a moment because, obviously you're a math guy. You're on the FI journey, and there's this debate that's always ongoing of 15 versus 30 year, and what's the opportunity cost, and getting out of debt and versus carrying a low interest rate debt for a longer term. As you're someone who's looking at an aggressive savings rate, an argument could be made potentially that, hey, anything you're paying on a 15-year that you could, have paid on a 30-year or lesser amount, then you could have invested the difference. Obviously there's an opportunity there to way of paying down the debt versus investing for the future. The most common question we get, hey, should I be paying down my debt? Should I be investing? How did you think through that process of, hey, let's make a higher monthly mortgage payment, and therefore, that is money that could have potentially been invested versus maybe you did decide to take out a 30-year and it's a lower amount, but you're able to invest more. Talk us through that.
Yeah, that's an interesting story because we bought our home in the summer of 2020, and taking some time to look back on that time in the mortgage arena, we got a 3% fixed interest rate. You're not getting that anytime soon anywhere else. So we made the decision of, hey, like, this is an interest rate that it's basically non-existent. 3% is absurd, and especially in today's market. So a 15-year mortgage, that's not really that much of a difference between a 30-year. And then you still have some like wiggle room to, take some money on the home and do that sort of things. And it's funny, would we do that now? Probably not. It would probably be a 30-year. If we were to move and buy a new home, it would probably be a 30-year mortgage. And it's just interesting because when you're out of debt, you look at different ways to, I don't want to say manipulate what you're doing with your money, but to just kind of be flexible with it. Is that instead of saying, hey, we have to, think of a different way we're paying on our home, we might have to think of it differently. We think of it in a way of, how can we take advantage of the situation that we put ourselves in? We were both out of debt. We bought our home. How can we make this situation benefit us? And that's such the nice thing about being in the FIRE mindset of, first of all, being in the FIRE mindset, you're out of debt. And then secondly, how can we use factors around us to benefit us? And that's something you can't do when you have a lot of debt and you don't have the FIRE mindset if you've already been saving. And that's not a realistic expectation for people right now. But if you set yourself up to be in a position where you want to be FIRE and you want to be really aggressive retiring, that is a situation that anyone can easily be in.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I presented the question as a dichotomous variable of, hey, you could have either taken out debt longer or invested. Of course, it's not that simple. And one of the variables that's unique to you guys is you did aggressively save early on. So there already was that base of savings. If someone isn't in that position and they're weighing, should I be taking out a longer term mortgage or a shorter term, and where am I at investing? The question they have to factor in, among many others, is, am I on track? Am I ahead? Am I behind? And certainly that will change the equation of how we look at that as well. When you guys came up with your FI number, I'm curious to hear more about how you determine what this is and how you evaluate this on an ongoing basis. In the FI community, which you're more plugged in than I am, but there's everything from back of napkin, rule 25, take your total annual expenses, including taxes, multiply it by 25. That's based on the 4% rule. We've talked about that on the show before. And then there's, much more nuanced calculators that are out there and available. So tell us more about how you guys have evaluated what your FI number is.
Yeah, we're not even that nuanced. We pick a number, hey, 50. What do we need to do to get there? And that wasn't let's calculate what we have, what we're saving, plug it into something, and that's what the number comes out. We started our FIRE journey being like, it's going to be 50. What do we need to do to get there? And I think looking at that way, it simplifies it a lot more, because you look at it from a perspective of, if that's the goal, all right, when we started, that was a couple years ago. So it's like 18 years to 50. What are we doing in the next 18 years to get there? And at that point, we didn't have kids. And then kids come and we're like, all right, 50 might not be possible. We might have to push it, but 50 still could be possible. What can we cut back on a little bit to get there? So I think that's such a nice thing about FIRE, is that, it's so adaptable to what you want to do. It can be 55, it can be 60, it can just be an unknown age
Mhm.
where you have your budget, you look at it, you look at what you're saving, and you're like, yeah, we can just do it now, and
Mhm.
then just start your fire journey from there.
Yeah, an important thing, and for those that are new on this fire journey, what you'll quickly realize as you start to run numbers is your annual expenses is really the factor that's going to drive this equation the most, both in terms of what you need, right? Because your projected need is based off of what you're going to have to potentially draw. So if you have two pharmacists, let's say both making $125,000, one is able to live off of 50% of their income, one's able to live off of 80% of their income, their FI numbers are going to be very, very different. And thus their savings rates are going to be very different because of the percentage of their income, right? That's available and able to save. So easier said than done. We know that pharmacists, cost of living, individual situations, but you see this on the regular where, someone who's able to really drive down cost of living expenses. And there's a balance here that we have to factor in versus someone that is not able to, for whatever reason, those numbers of what that FI number is going to be and the timeline to get there are going to be drastically different for sure. Derek, one of the things we talk a lot about on this show is we firmly believe from personal experience and working with hundreds of pharmacists one-on-one on this topic that a good financial plan, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. We really have to be striking this balance between, yes, we have to be ready for the future. Yes, we have to take care of our future selves, but we also have to be making sure we're prioritizing living a rich life today. And we tend to think about these on one end of the spectrum or the other, right? There's some that we see are very, very aggressive savers, but aren't necessarily very comfortable with spending in any capacity. And then there, of course, is the opposite end of the equation as well. How have you guys been able to, especially with a young family, strike this balance between, hey, we need to continue to push forward with getting our FI number and whatever that age and goal is, but also like, hey, this is a season and a phase of life that we also want to make sure that we're living a rich life. We know that eventually this season will pass as well.
Yeah, it's always something when you have kids, everything changes, and everyone's going to tell you that. You don't believe it until you're in it, and that's something that you want to enrich your kids' lives with different experiences and do things. And you know we've talked about, hey, we could take them to Disney World, we can take them
Mm,
on a nice vacation, we could also go to a national park. There's a different cost difference with those, especially if you can like drive to one. We live in Cincinnati, so we're close to
mhm,
Mammoth Cave Systems, Red River Gorge in Kentucky. So really nice places that the kids will enjoy, and that's a big cost savings, um, as opposed to like a more expensive vacation like
mhm,
Disney. Nothing against Disney. My daughter loves Frozen. She will
mhm,
eventually go. But that's something that right now with we have more expenses because we have two very young kids. We have a nanny
mhm,
that we're paying for. Once they're older and they're in school, we don't have the nanny costs. Some of that cost goes towards maybe a new car fund. Maybe that goes to
mm,
a vacation fund so we can do like a yearly
mhm,
vacation somewhere nice. That goes back into retirements, and it just kind of morphs. It's kind of like a primordial soup of just
mhm,
the funds are there, they're being used for this, they're being used for that. What can we do now to make sure that, hey, when the time is right, we can afford that vacation, we can afford to take them on like really fun like
mhm,
family trips to like Disney. And right now, that looks like more affordable options. We take them to the Cincinnati Kids Museum, which is a great place for kids. We take them to national parks, and those are so much more affordable and fit within
mhm,
our current fire budget, um, without just sitting at home and not doing anything.
mhm,
So it's in terms of what you do with family enrichment. It depends on what you want to do, how much you're
mhm,
paying now for expenses that won't be there. And for us, we have expenses of a nanny that won't be there for too long.
mhm,
It's going to be here for a couple of years. But then after that, it's like, okay, we're going to go back to saving more aggressively. How about we also save aggressively for a nice trip? How about we
mhm.
save aggressively for, programs that we want our kids in? So, and we couldn't do that without being out of debt. I keep going back to getting out of debt, but that's just so important because it allows you to be on that platform to just do so many different things with what you want to do with your money.
Mhm. Great stuff. My last question for you, Derek, is, for the students or new grads that might be listening, they're saying, Derek, this is great, but I've got $175,000 of debt. I'm trying to purchase a house in this housing environment where costs are crazy, interest rates are crazy, and I feel like there's not a whole lot of margin. And sure, maybe I'd like to pursue a fire journey, but at a minimum, I'd like to just build a good foundation and make sure that I've got a solid plan. What advice would you have for new grads coming out today in 2024 of, as you look back now 10 years ago, just a different space that we're in? What are your thoughts for those new grads coming out today?
Yeah, you have to realize what goals you want to accomplish first. Some people want to own a home. I'm not going to tell people to not buy a house. Some people want to start a family. Never going to tell people to not have a family. When you have a lot of debt, and unfortunately with a lot of pharmacy students coming out, new grads, and some people do residencies where they're not making their like full salary yet, it's hard to say to someone, hey, you got to really get on that debt and get that down. From what I saw when I started my journey of paying off my debt, I was working with a lot of older pharmacists that when I was in my like early 20s. And a lot of them were like, hey, if I could go back 30 years and be in your shoes, I would do exactly what you're doing. And that's the affirmation that I needed, that I was on the right path, because it wasn't fun. Paying off debt is not fun. It is not glamorous. It is not full of constant rewards. You're not doing a lot of things. You're just watching a number go down, and that's all it's doing. Mm-hmm. But once you get out and pass through that, your options just expand so much. And there are some people that, graduate, they already have a family, they already have a house. That requires, a sit down with your spouse, your partner, and talking about a budget of, hey, how can we get this down? How can we get to where we need to go?
Yeah.
And the first step that I would encourage is to budget and figure out a number of like, when is the realistic goal we can pay it off? Mm-hmm. And I think figuring that number out for some people might be longer than they thought it would. And that's a really important step, is to figure out, look at all of our expenses. Maybe you have a mortgage, you have expense with the kids. You're thinking, hey, we can knock this student loan down in a couple years. It's actually like 10. Do you want to wait 10 years to pay that off? Or what can you do now to like chip that number down to 5? What can you do to chip it down to 6? And then those, 4 or 5 years you save of not being, chained down with your student loans can be really reassuring, kind of a kick to get into gear, to get some stuff done.
Great stuff, Derek. This has been a joy to reconnect and hear your story, hear where you're at 7 years later, hear how the foundation you built early, you're seeing the fruit of that now. And I think there's only more fruit to come. So thank you so much for taking time to come on the show and to give us an update where you're at.
Great to be back.
As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.